Yo, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Welcome to episode 3 of the series where I'm teaching you guys how to start coding for FiveM. If you haven't been following along in the series, in the first episode, we set up your coding environment. We set up the basics of Lua, going over things like variables, functions, and things like that. So if you haven't watched that video, make sure you go watch that first. Then in the second video, we went over natives and FiveM resources, how you can load them properly with the server, shared, and client-sided files. With that being said, in today's video, what we're going to actually start doing is I'm going to kind of walk you guys through how you can actually start making the client and server talk to one another. And then after this, once you guys get a good understanding of this, in our next video, we'll actually start creating our first resource, because after you learn this, you've got a really good understanding of basically every core part of a script, because you're going to understand, the basics of Lua, you're going to understand FiveM natives, and then after this video, you're going to hopefully understand how to actually communicate and talk between the client and server. So basically, how this works is the server, look at it like this. The server is going to be one side of your server, or one side of your script, and then the client's another side of your script, right? For more in depth, I want more in depth in the last video if you want to go watch that. So what we need to actually do is communicate between these two, right? So to do that is we use something called events. So for example, what we can actually do is just do register net event, and then we can just make this event called anything. Let's just say, um, this is my test event. Then what we're going to do is we're going to do a function like this. And then what we're going to do is all we're going to do is do print made it to the test server event, right? So all we're going to do now is we're going to basically try and make it get to this, to where it's going to print made it to test server event. Now to do that, what we can do is we're going to go to the client, and we can actually just copy this event, and we can just do trigger server event, and then we just paste the event name. So now if we actually go into our TX admin, or sorry, ensure, and then your script name, and this, this course we've named it my script. We're going to ensure my script. As you see, you made it to the test server event, right? And if we actually go to the client and we just note this out, or we restart this again, you're going to see it's not going to do that. So that's basically the bare minimum of how you can make a client talk to the server, right? Now, vice versa, let's say you want the server to talk to the client. Well, to do that, what you're going to need to do is you can come in here, and we're going to do the exact same thing. We're literally going to copy this event, put it in our client, and then we're going to remove this from the server for now. Then we're going to do trigger client events, and then we're going to paste that same event name right here. And then the difference between a server and a client event is going to be, when you do trigger server event, all you have to do is paste the event name and then any parameters you want, which we'll get into parameters in just a second. But then that's all, because then it's going to automatically send it from the player's PC. On the server, though, you need to specify who you want to trigger the client event for. So for example, you use that by using server IDs. So for example, if we do -1, it's going to trigger to every single player in the entire server. If you do 1, it's going to trigger to ID 1. If you do 2, it's going to trigger to ID 2. If you do 3, it's going to trigger to ID 3. So to get your server ID, you can actually just come in game, do /tx to open up the admin menu. And then as you see right here, 1. My ID is 1. So I can either do 1, which will work, or I can do -1. For testing, we'll just do -1, because -1, again, will trigger this to every single player in the entire server. So now we're going to save this, and then we're going to come over here, make sure everything's here. We're going to make changes to made it to the test client events, right? So now what we're going to do is we're going to come in game. We're going to clear our console, and then we're just going to ensure my script once again. And as you see, it actually didn't make it here. So the reason it didn't make it here is because we're going to be calling this at the exact same time. So it's going to be trying to trigger the event before it registers properly. So this is something that is very common that a lot of beginners kind of overlook. And you need to wait for, the event to be registered. So to do that, you'd really want to add some kind of, load event. So you'd want to wait to see if the player loaded. Then you could start loading events and things. But just for the sake of this video, what we're actually going to do is we're just going to add a wait 1000. So what that's going to basically do is wait is basically going to tell the script to don't do anything, and then you're just going to wait right here at this line for X amount of seconds in milliseconds. So 1000 is 1 second. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to say wait 1 second, then trigger it, right? So now if we come over here and we restart our script, we're just going to wait 1 second, boom, right? So hopefully that kind of makes sense. That's something that I think a lot of beginners always overlook, which is the syncing of events. If you try and trigger something instantly, like we just did over here, it's not going to work. So, always try and make sure you add things like this, that everything is, happening chronologically, so everything will go by smoothly. Hopefully that kind of makes sense, and you kind of understand the basic understanding of how to make the client and server communicate to one another. But now we're going to take this a step further by adding parameters, because something you're going to be using a lot is when someone does something on the client, you're going to want to tell the server, hey, this is what the client just did. for example, if you wanted to pass an entity, right? Okay, well, this player just interacted with this entity, or you want to pass, okay, well, this player just interacted at these chords, or whatever the case may be. What you can do is actually pass something called parameters. So, for example, if we want, let's go back and we're going to go back to our server event. So, let's go back and unmark these. And what we're going to do is we're going to trigger the server event, but this time we're actually going to pass parameters. To do that, we're going to put a comma. Similar to how we basically did on the server side where we had to pass the server ID, we're going to pass something different in the client. So here you can pass whatever you want. This can literally be anything you want it to be. This can be string, it can be numbers, it can be a boolean, it can be whatever you want it to be. For this, let's just put my name Trace, right? So then what we can do is we can come over to the server and we can start listening for that parameter by just typing whatever here. So let's put server name, right? Then you can also add multiple different parameters as well. So you can do trace, you could do, let's do, 5,000, and let's set this to false, or 2,500, sorry, and then let's set this to false. So now we come back to the server. We'll listen for the server name, we'll listen for the money, and we'll listen for is police, right? Because now if we go back to the client, we're going to be passing trace, so server name, we're going to be passing 2,500, which is the money, and then is police, which is false. Now, let me go ahead and make something very clear, just for quick context. You would never want to pass server money, name, or police from the client side. And if you remember why in the last video, is because the client can always be overridden, right? A modder could essentially come in here and pass $20,000, and it basically spoof the event to think they have $20,000. You'd always want to check money, job, and things like that from the server side. But again, just for this example, we're using these parameters. So now what we can do is we can actually do player name, and we just do dot server name, just like this. If you remember in our very first video, we went over how to actually start combining strings and things like that. So then we can actually do print money amount and print is police, right? And then when you do, you might see something here, toString. What toString is going to do is Boolean by default. You cannot put false or true. If you do toString, it's going to make it print. So it's going to basically make a Boolean or a number into a string. That's what toString means. This is just basic Lua. You can kind of look up on the Lua docs, toString docs if you want more in depth on that, but that's basically all that does. So now what we can actually do is we go back to our TX admin and we just restart it. So we ensure my script. And as you're going to see, player name trace, money amount 2,500 is police false. If we go back into our script, we can change this to trace is awesome. Right? Then we come back into our TX admin, we restart our script again, trace is awesome. So that's how you can pass parameters to the server. And just like how we pass it to the server, we can also pass it to the client. So for example, let's go ahead and add our listening event back on our client, and let's go ahead and add our wait and trigger back here. So now what we can do is we can go ahead and pass the name here. So we can do trace is awesome. Then we can pass 2,500 or 25,000, whatever, then we can pass false. So then just how we did this, we can actually copy the same parameters, come to the client, put those here. And then all we have to do, we can print those here. We come back to our client, we restart the script, and now we have the exact same thing, right? It's going to print the player name, the money amount, and is police. So that's basically what parameters do. Just remember on the server, the first parameter always has to be your target. So again, if there was other players in the server right now, this event would trigger to every single one of them. If you wanted to only trigger to one player, so for example, if you were doing a script where it's like, if someone does a command, and you want it to only trigger to that one player who ran the command, you wouldn't want to use -1 because then it's going to trigger to every single player on the server. You would want to use the actual player server ID instead of -1. So let's do a command. Let's do register command talk to me, right? And then we're going to do function and false. So if you remember in the last video, we actually did a register command, but we did it on the client. This time we're doing it on the server. When you register a command on the server, you actually have to pass the parameter here called source. And what that's going to do is it's going to pass the actual player ID that's calling this command. And why that's important is because if we wanted to go ahead and trigger this test event, then we wouldn't, if we don't want to trigger it to every single player when the command /talk to me is ran, we can actually do source. So what that's going to do is it's going to, when the player runs /talk to me, it's going to get the source, right? And then it's going to trigger to the source only to that player. So instead of this going to every single player on the server, it's only going to go to me, right? Oh, you know what it is? We have to remove the wait, right? So we have to listen for the event. Let's unmark that. Now let's go back into here. Let's start the event. And now let's run the command, and there we are, right? So instead of it now just triggering on its own, we have to run the command /talk to me, and it now shows here. So again, if we add this wait, it'll actually break it and we'll have to wait 1 second before the command is registered. So all you have to do is remove that. But you can also, like, let's say you want that normally, right? You want to wait 10 seconds before the command is going to show. You can put wait 10,000. That's going to wait 10 seconds and then it's going to register the command for it to actually work. Um, Hopefully this kind of makes sense. I want to keep this kind of video kind of more on the short end because it's not too advanced. It's just kind of getting the basics of events and listening so that way you can have the client and server talk to one another. So now if you've made it up to this point, things that you should have a good understanding on, because in our next video, we're going to actually start coding our first resource. So the things you should have a good understanding before our next video comes out is going to be the basics of Lua, which is going to be your Booleans. It's going to be your variables and all of those. Then you're going to want a good understanding of, resource management and FiveM natives. What are FiveM natives? How do you find them? What are they used for? And then you're going to want to know, okay, well, what's server side of a script? What's client side of a script? What's shared side of a script? Then you're going to want to know how to use events, how to make the client and server talk to one another. Once you have all three concepts of these down, then you're going to be able to start coding your first resource and actually start making scripts for FiveM. So hopefully this kind of makes sense. Hopefully these past three videos have been really helpful. If you want episode 4 where we actually start coding our first resource, make sure you comment down below episode 4. Once we get 10 likes on this video, I will release episode 4 where we're going to start creating our very own FiveM script. With that being said, I hope you guys have a wonderful day and see you guys in the next video.